Hi everybody, this is Kat Jackson with the Hobby Hangout, and tonight we're having another tutorial session with Caleb Wissenback from CK Studios. He's on the third part of a small series of training that we're doing a bit of blending techniques. If you haven't caught the first two, go ahead and hit our Hobby Hangout channel on YouTube for the first two episodes, and you'll be able to catch up on what we're leading up to tonight. And tonight's episode is kind of applying all of the techniques that we've been building upon, and tonight Caleb will be demonstrating on a bust, so a little bit different of a figure as well. So we're usually here for about an hour for those of you that are watching, and I'm going to turn this over to Caleb to get going.
Hey everybody. Are we still getting delayed? Oh, there we go. Okay. So I'm Caleb Wissenback with CK Studios, and I'm in the studio. Kat's with me tonight, so we're having kind of a live. I guess it's always live, but we're kind of live tonight, and we're just gonna, like Kat said, we're gonna kind of expand on what we talked about last week. We talked a lot about blending techniques, and I kind of gave a few examples. And now tonight I'm going to show kind of how all of those examples come together to create a piece. We're going to go relatively quick. We're going to work on a bust. It's nice and big. You're going to be able to see a lot of what's going on. We will go kind of quick so that we can get through a lot of the blending techniques, and you'll see how everything kind of interacts and works together. The main thing I want you guys to focus on while I'm doing this, I might not even be talking about it a lot, but watch a lot of the brush work and watch how the brush is being used. You'll see a lot of times I'll come in and I'm going to be using the side of my brush to do like some big plane blending, but then I might need to come in and actually create some kind of tight blending, or I have like a little bit of a mistake that I made or something, and I need to develop more opacity right there or something. You'll see me come in and do almost like a stippling, or I'll start doing a little bit of where I'm pulling the paint down with the tip of my brush and stuff like that. So kind of pay attention to that tonight. That was really brought to my attention with this coaching with Kat this weekend when I was showing her when we painted on the two busts. A lot of things that I don't realize I'm doing. She noticed and kind of asked me about it later on, and I didn't even recognize that I needed to talk about that. So kind of pay attention to that. If you guys see something like you're like, oh, wait a minute, what did he do right there? Feel free to stop me, and we can definitely talk about that, because a lot of this is all about application and technique. It's really important that we learn how to use our brush. It doesn't matter what blending technique we're going to use. We got to really have a lot of those brush skills, because those are going to be the most important things. Once you have brush skills, once you kind of know how to use your brush, how the paint's going to react, you'll learn all the blending techniques out there. Last week we talked about a whole bunch of the different blending techniques, so there's a lot of them out there. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and start on this. So I'm going to switch over to the other camera. Okay, so this is the bust that we're going to work on. It's the anonymous bust that Alfonso Giraldes uses in his class. It's a super wonderful color. I don't even know what to call it. It's like a blow your mind with colors class. So if you're interested in trying this technique later on with at home, if you guys want to kind of follow along with the recording and stuff like that, you can pick up the model from Alfonso. I think he's AKA Banshee. I think you can contact him on Facebook or on Cool Mini or Not. I don't know how much he follows Cool Mini or Not anymore, but anyways, if you do some searches, I'm sure you can find his piece. I guess I should have figured that out before the class. Anyway, so this is the model we're going to use. I've already base coated it. Normally I'd like to show you guys base coating, but we're kind of limited on time tonight. So I went ahead and pre-base coated it just using the airbrush. That way it'll go a little quicker. The lights are making it a little brighter than it is in actuality. It was done with Minotaur paints. Minotaur paints dry, slightly glossy, so we're getting just a little satin gloss effect, but it's okay. You guys will still really be able to see a lot of the techniques. You're going to see how the paint kind of starts to lay. So the next thing I'll talk about is my palette and what I'm going to use. I learned this from Ben Comets, is to use a very neutral skin tone. There's a ton of skin tones out. I'm looking at like my Reaper line right now, and I'd say I got like 15 or 20 skin tones. But one that he showed me is Talor and Flesh. Unfortunately, GW does not make this color anymore, which makes me very sad. It's a very neutral color. It reacts very well with white and black, and you're going to notice we're going to use that a lot in our painting. So I really like Talor and Flesh. A close approximation that I found is Tanned Skin from Reaper. Tanned Skin is close. There we are. Tanned Skin is close, but you can see it's just slightly lighter, slightly yellower. If you were to add just a touch of black to it, I mean, just the most minute amounts, you'd get something close to this. But you'll notice that's not going to be super critical, because when we start to create our palette, you'll see I'm going to use a lot of black and a lot of white. So this is a close color. The Tanned Skin is very close. I don't have any Vallejo paints with me right now, so I can't tell you what is comparable with Vallejo. So the first thing we'll do is we'll kind of set our palette a little bit, and we're going to start off with sketching. I kind of talked about that before. I think Wapple calls it pre-colored shading, colored shading, something like that. I can't remember exactly what he calls it. I call it sketching. I know a lot of other painters call it sketching to one extent or another. Now, I did prep my model with that zenithal highlighting. I sprayed it black. You know, in my primer, I sprayed it black, and then I came over from the top, from right about this point here, and shot white directly down on it. So you'll notice I do have just a little bit of color transition in the shadows and stuff. So that helps. It definitely helps with it. And so we're going to prep a couple colors that we're going to use. So here I have my, there we are. I have my basic tan. I'm going to come in and add some white. I'm going to try to add some white. Add a little white.
What white are you using? Are you using
Schminky white? Schminky, whatever it's called. Yeah.
Artist acrylic.
Yeah. I like golden also.
Yeah.
The titanium. Almost any of those titanium whites. I don't like Liquitex titanium white.
I don't either. It's too runny.
Yeah. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna just take and prep two colors off of my palette. So I'm gonna grab a little bit of this white, and I'm gonna prep kind of a nice lighter mid-tone right here, and then I'm gonna prep just a little bit of black, and this will be my shadow color here. Okay, so once we're ready, we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna go in and start kind of bulking up the model. So I'll go ahead and take my palette off. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come in with that slightly lighter skin. I'm going to move that palette a little bit further. There we are right here. Okay, and I'm going to start to find my light shape. We kind of saw it when we did the zenithal highlighting, so we're going to kind of remember where that is. But we're going to start to kind of sketch in that light. And you'll notice I'm not being real fine with it. I'm just going to come in and what we call sketching. I'm just really going to bulk up. I'm not really working on blending or anything. I'm just going to kind of bulk where I see that those lighter colors are going to be. One benefit of painting relatively thick with my paint, as you can see, I can keep going back over it, and I'm kind of moving it around. I'm kind of adjusting how far it is and how bright it is and stuff. We want to make sure that we avoid putting too heavy of edges. We're going to have edges, but we kind of don't want to have super tall edges. If we have them too tall, they're going to be really hard to clean up later. Man, that's really blurring out.
Might need a bonus.
Yeah.
Still pretty hard to see. Hmm.
Is there like a little white card you could put in the corner so your camera could adjust the white balance?
Yeah. Hmm. Hmm. What did I do? Oops. Oh, sorry. Uh, Sorry, guys. I'm looking for my settings on this thing. I guess I should have played with that before. I think this black is. Let's see what happens if I get rid of this black. I think this black might be drowning it out. I was kind of wondering about that. Yeah.
It's way better.
Yeah, that's way better. Okay. So we learned one thing. I don't want to use black with my background. That the camera can't catch it for the color balance. Well, you know what? That'll help you guys kind of see the colors that I've created too, with the tan right here, and then that mid-tone. You can see it's a little bit lighter. You can see how kind of gray that darker shadow skin tone got. It really grays out when I add that black to it, and that's going to be really nice. So we're really working with neutral colors because we're going to come back in with very dense colors later on. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to sketch out those first initial highlights. Below the eyelid here, along the roof of the nose, back into here again. Along the top of the lip here. Here in the chin, even though you have stubble and stuff, and you'll end up with models with beards, make sure that you sketch in that color, even where the beard is going to be, because without it, you'll start to lose your balance for your model. So I'll even sketch over a beard with my skin tones, and I'll come back in and recreate the beard later on. But I do try to sketch over it with just my skin tone color when I'm working. It just helps to make sure that I catch the volumes properly. The whole reason that we're doing this sketching is to see how light falls. If I were to sit and spend a ton of time blending and trying to create these lights with blending, and then the lights aren't right, I've wasted just a ton of time. So this is really just more of a time saver than anything else, but it's going to help us bulk up and establish those highlights so that our blends will run faster. So now I'm going to add just a little more white to my palette here. You can see I've drugged down some white more into the skin tone. I'm not really cleaning my brush too much either. I'm letting it kind of just build up on my brush. There we go. And now you're really going to start to see how the highlights kind of shape up into the model. Now, one thing I'm doing, you guys see me kind of move my model around a lot. The reason being is that I'm constantly working my highlights towards the brightest area of the highlight. If I were to take and work my highlights towards the shadow, it's going to create a hard edge. We don't want that, especially when we start to do more of the cleanup blends. If we start creating a hard edge away from where the paint is supposed to collect, we're going to fight that and we'll never get smooth blends. So I want to make sure that I'm always building. Every time you run the brush, I can do it on this real quick. Every time I run the brush across the surface, when I pick up, you'll notice it leaves a big bulk of paint, right? So we want to make sure that that bulk of paint that we're leaving with the brush is going towards where it needs to be. So if it's a highlight, we want that big bulk of paint, or that spot that's going to be super opaque. We want that going towards the highlight. If it's the shadow, we want the tip of the brush working towards the shadow, so that it collects all that paint there. Um, that's really important to learn. No matter what blending style you're going to do, we want to make sure that we're using the brush properly, and we're not fighting ourselves by placing color and light where it doesn't need to be. Then we have to come in and try to figure out how to clean that up. And a lot of times, if you get too much paint down, the only way to really fix that is to repaint. It becomes really difficult.
Oh no.
So here I'm just coming down, and I'm going to create these two creases of the face. Can you see that okay? Yeah. I'm just really bulking in this area right here. We'll do the same thing on this side. Yeah, it's still good. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to kind of move the model around a little bit and just kind of take a peek at how the light's hitting. It's really good to not just keep your model stationary like this, but to kind of move it around and look at it, because you want to see how you're getting that kind of movement. You can see the light. It almost seems like the light is following the model. I mean, it is a little bit. We're getting a little bit of reflection from the camera light, but you'll notice when you're at home and you roll the model, if it kind of looks like the light is following the model, you know that you're setting your light pretty well. So now I'm going to come in with almost some pure white. It looks super stark. It looks really bright. When I was first learning this technique and Ben was showing me, I was just like so resistant because he was going so heavy with the light, and I'm like, it's too much. It's too much. But once we got into the later stages of the model, his had just so much more contrast than mine, because he was willing to take it that far. So kind of play with your paint when you're doing this, and don't be scared to really go in and let that paint kind of talk to you. So I'm pretty happy with where the highlights are sketched now. It's definitely very bright. I'm going to come in and I'm going to start to create some of the shadows. So I'm going to take that grayed out skin tone that I have, and I'm going to start doing the exact opposite. Now where I put in the highlights, I'm going to start putting in shadows. Mix a little more. It'll be real heavy under the chin here. Right here, just under that crease in the lip and along the bottom of the nose. I'm going to be real dark in there. I'm going to kind of add just a little more black for that area here. We want this to be really dark. This always, if we have really good contrast here and right here below the lip, those 2 points really create a really good expression and depth of the model. The same with right here in the crease of the eyes. We want to make sure that we get in there real tight. Now, if we're doing a female figure, we're going to be a little softer with our shadows. We don't want to be quite so intense. One thing that really helps with female figures is if we're really soft with our transitions and our shadows, they tend to tell more story. Whereas males, you can be really harsh with your transitions, and that will help to tell more of a story there too. So we need to kind of consider the model that we're using when we're going in and doing these shadows. With this model, I really want a lot of character to him, so I'm going to increase the contrast as far as I possibly can. The further I can increase the contrast, the more intensity the model will take on, and you'll notice that with this model as we really start to put the colors together on him, you're going to notice he's very dark. It's going to lend to a very expressionful, I don't know if that's a word, but it'll be a very expressionful model. I really want to define these creases right here along the eyes. This model is sculpted so well. Alfonso did so much with this. It's such a fun model to use because there's so much expression with it, and I've seen it painted so many different ways. It was really neat to watch all the different ways that it was painted in the class that we did, because some guys painted with very saturated colors and the other guys painted with very desaturated colors, and some guys went with a little bit more highlights, other guys went with a softer highlight, and it actually aged the model. And we had like very young, virile Irish guy with flaming red hair, and then at another time we had a very grayed man with a lot of wrinkles. He went in and really pushed the contrast into the wrinkles and really defined the wrinkles around the eyes and stuff. And you'd swear they were two different models. I mean, one looked 30 or 40 years older than the other model. And it was just by creating those contrasts. So you can see here with the model, we've got a lot of contrast going on now. I mean, it almost looks like all those guys from Mad Max. I forget their names. That's terrible. But it almost looks like one of them. You know, you're seeing these huge contrasts. So once we're pretty good and we know that we have our light where we like it, we're going to start going in and we're going to create, we're going to start to feather this out. So again, I'm going to reestablish my colors. But this time I'm not going to be quite as bright with that highlight color. And then my shadow color will be just a little bit softer, because we're going to want to start to bridge these colors out. So before, if you guys noticed when I was painting with super high, with super thick opacity. You can see on the model the paint's pretty thick. I was really laying it on. So now I want to start to thin that paint out a little more. So you'll notice here, you can see I'm starting to get a nice thinner paint right there. See that on my palette? I want to thin that paint out a bit. So once I start to thin that paint out, I'm just going to start working in here and kind of just softening these down with glazes. I'm gonna stay away from the super concentrated areas of my highlight because I want to keep those. But I'm just going to start to soften those transitions. Now here, I'm starting to really use the side of my brush. You're going to notice when I paint here, I'm going to lay that brush in and it almost hits that entire brow as it pulls that paint across. and then I'm just doing a spit blending. You know, we talked about that before. So I'm pulling a little paint, and then I'm gonna clear my brush. You don't have to necessarily use your mouth. You can use a paper towel, but I'm gonna clear my brush so that's nice and clear. You'll notice my brush has no paint on it, and I'm gonna grab some more of this paint and just kind of take it off until I have the opacity that I want. Now you're starting to see that those transitions are starting to soften up a little bit. I'm not quite as harsh as I was before. So I'll apply that a few times. It's going to take a few layers. Don't be in a rush with this stage. We can kind of rush the sketching stage, and that's kind of fun. You know, we're really laying a bunch of paint down, and you're really seeing the model change. At this point, we're just going to kind of be gentle. We want to make sure our paint's drying in between each coat and stuff. If we get going too fast, we're going to start making errors that we don't want to mess with later on. So I'm just going to lightly start to mess with these transitions a little bit and start to soften them up. I'll come into my darker colors here and start to just soften up some of those transitions. You'll notice I'm really pulling that paint far. As I come in and grab it, I can pull that paint for quite a ways because it's still relatively, I mean, it's not a glaze, it's still relatively thick, so it's still going to have a little bit of opacity to it, but not as much as what I was doing with my sketching. So at this point, kind of play with your colors that you're using and see how your paint reacts at this point, because you're going to notice that the more familiar you get with your paint, the easier this will become.
Caleb?
Yes, go ahead.
I have a question. Do you normally work from light to dark or dark to light, or is the path, you know, how does that path generally work?
I am one of the subscribers to the kind of the old, I guess they still call it the French blending technique. When I'm choosing my base coat color, if we have a spectrum from 1 to 10, 1 is our brightest highlight and 10 is our darkest shadow, my base coat is going to be somewhere around a 3 or a 4. It's much easier to darken paint than to lighten paint. So I always tend to paint from a higher midpoint. So I'm not right in the middle. I'm not a 5. I'm more of a 3 or a 2. I mean a 3 or a 4. That gives me like 2 steps, maybe 3 steps of highlight, but it'll give me like 4 or 5 steps of shadow. And that gives you a lot of room to play. Like I said, it's much easier to do some glazes to darken a color than do glazes to lighten a color. So that's the whole point in painting a little brighter. You notice my shadow colors were quite a bit further than my highlight colors were from that mid-tone that I initially started with. I had to be real soft with how much black I added to my mid-tone when I started mixing that, whereas could be kind of heavy-handed with my highlight because it can only go so far. I mean, eventually it's going to hit white, but if I start off and I put my shadows in at pure black right now, they're going to be really, really hard to clean up, and also there's not going to be anywhere left to go. Once I hit that pure black, I don't really have any more room to move. So I don't want those sketched in shadows to be pure black, or I'm going to fight that also. I want to be able to vary that shadow a little bit. It gives you a lot more room to maneuver and place the model where the light of the model where you want it, where you see it. Because sometimes you'll think you have the light sketched where you want it, and then as the model starts to progress, you're going to start to notice that, oh, I didn't really like it like that. It's too bright, or it's too dark, or he's too gloomy, stuff like that. So give yourself some room.
What was your base primer coat color?
My base primer coat color is Tyler and Flesh.
With a lighter color.
Yes, the reason I chose Tyler and Flesh is it's a very neutral flesh tone. The closest that I found, GW does not make Tyler and Flesh anymore, unfortunately. So the nearest color that I found is Reaper's Tan Skin. It's slightly lighter, it's slightly yellower.
Mm-hmm.
If you give it just a very little touch of black, it'll get close to Tyler and Flesh. I like Tyler and Flesh because it's a neutral skin tone. It's not necessarily pink, it's not necessarily yellow, it's not necessarily green. it allows you to play with the glazes, and you're going to see that here in just a little bit. We're going to come in and start to really create the shape of the face and the temperature of the face with glazes. So right now the face is still very neutral. If you look at it right now, it's definitely got some aspects to it, but it's a very neutral face. It's kind of boring to look at. It's got neat contrast, but it's a very boring face. So we'll end up adding a lot more colors and transitions to create more interest with the model. So right now I'm just kind of tuning up and trying to soften up those sketches. I'm not really necessarily working to get it perfectly smooth. Two reasons. One, on busts, if you can keep just a little bit of roughness to the skin tone, it creates more realism. Our skin is not perfectly smooth. It's not porcelain. It's going to have pores and scars and dimples and age spots and et cetera, et cetera. So we want to make sure that we're still allowing that. That's one of the things that makes like Kirill's models so fantastic, is the texture that he can put into the most minute areas of the model that just create more interest, more life. Ben's also very good at that. If you look at Ben's work, you'll see a lot of little dots where he's painting, and instead of glazing it, he'll come in and he'll dot, 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 dot. He'll put all these dots in, and it just creates this really neat texture. So that also helps with that base coating by being real heavy-handed with my brush and with that paint. I can also create a little bit of texture there. So that sketching that we did has a lot of application for different things. And the more you play with it, the more you'll get comfortable with it, and then you'll really start to see that. So I'm getting close now. The colors are really starting to move kind of where I want them. My transition points are not quite as harsh as they were before, and I'm just about ready to start doing some unifying glazes. They're going to help with just that next section of contrast. Or I'm not of contrast, I'm sorry, that next section of smoothing that transition. All right, so now you can see it's not quite as garish as it was before. We're starting to really get some shape to the model. Now we can start to kind of play with smoothing everything out. So now I'm going to start working on glazes. Before, there's my palette. Before you guys saw, I started to thin that paint out right here, and it was relatively thin. So now I'm going to really start to thin that paint out. Like right here, you'll notice it really well. See how it doesn't even want to stay kind of smeared on the palette. It's really bunching up. My brush is nice and wet. I don't want it too wet because I want to be able to control it. And I'm just going to come in here now, and I'm going to start to create these glazes. And they're just going to help unify everything. Again, I'm working kind of into the middle of the model. I'm not necessarily working from the highlight to the shadow, and I'm not necessarily working from the shadow to the highlight. I'm kind of pushing that paint around so that it'll settle right kind of into the middle transitions and just kind of soften all those areas that were, that we were kind of creating. Those transition points are, you'll notice the model is starting to get darker too. The skin tone is starting to lose a little bit of its brightness. And man, the light is really picking up the whites on this. It's not quite that garish in person. I guess this is a little tough to kind of show. It's really picking up the light. But this is just softening those transition areas. So before, where I was doing a spit blend, I'm doing more of a glaze now. You can see how long I can move the paint with the brush. It's nice and wet, and the brush is staying pretty loaded. I'm just kind of walking this across. Now I will come back with those brighter colors and also glaze those in too when I start to lose some of my highlights, because I will. When I come in and glaze that softer color in, I'll have to come back in and put the highlights back in again. We talked about that, you know, in our last discussion on blending, about how we'll have to go over things quite a few times. We'll go back and forth, back and forth. This model's going to take that too. I'm going to have to really kind of move back and forth with it. So here I'm using just a little more of the highlight color and just reestablishing kind of some of those colors in the forehead. Kat, let me know if I go off camera.
Okay.
Add a little more white to the palette.
Yeah.
So here I added some more white to it. I'm going to kind of just come in and reestablish some of those highlights. Again, I'm using the whole side of my brush to move those. I'm not trying to paint with the tip of my brush like this. I'm using the side of my brush to really drag that. And you can see there's not a lot of paint on my brush. So this is more like the glaze style. Like across this surface here, across that nice surface of those eyelids. See that, how it came all the way back into to the side, and then I can kind of come back in and grab some of it and push it back in. Then I'll grab that mid-tone again and soften up that transition. We want to get rid of those hard lines. So we'll just kind of take these colors back and forth a few times until we really get that color that we want. It's a touch brighter. Create a little light in there. Now at this point, you'll start to notice that the model's really going to start to take shape now as we start to add those highlights and shadows in. You'll start to kind of get a feel for where the temperatures are going to land. It's kind of weird. Even though you don't have any temperatures, I'm already starting to see where I'm going to start placing some of those colors that I want to add to the model. So here, I'm kind of doing a wet on wet blending. I laid down that white, and I laid it down kind of thick, kind of quick, and then I came right back in it, and I didn't even clear my brush. I just went and grabbed that shadow color and went right next to it with that shadow color, and it kind of allowed me to intermix those colors together. I'll do the same thing here. I'll kind of create this highlight here, and then I'll take that mid-tone and just run right alongside that highlight. And now I have a little bit of the mid-tone with a little bit of the highlight underneath. So it's almost a mix of of wet blending where I'm like blending wet on wet with a wet surface with another paint on it, but I'm also kind of doing a little bit of two brush because I had that highlight color that I'd originally laid down. I had that underneath the mid-tone color, and it's going to allow those to kind of interplay again. So if you notice, see, I have a little bit of that mid-tone, but that highlight color is underneath, and as I move the brush around, that highlight color will mix in, and I can come in just a little bit closer to the brighter spots. So it's almost creating like dual colors on the brush as I go in and paint. So you're not stuck with just one blending technique. It's really good to kind of play with all of these and learn what your limits are with the brush and what kind of lead time you have with your paint before it starts to get chalky and it won't work how you want it to do. So you can see now I'm really starting to get a nice transition here with this side of the face. I'm really kind of concentrating on this side. I don't know if I'll have time to do the whole thing, but I'd like to get into some glazes. Yeah, it's already 8 o'clock, so we'll kind of keep working on that. I'm going to clean up in that eye now. It's still really chunky in that eye. We can kind of start to clean that up. Now, we don't want to lose too much of this shadow because it's going to be really important to keep that shadow pretty heavy in there. But we do want that eyelid to kind of pop out a little bit more. And I will put just a little bit of shadow right under that eyelid there as I kind of create this here. Now here I'm doing that stippling. I got some of that shadow up too high, and to erase it, it's such a hard line that I can't glaze over the top of it. So I'll come in and I'll actually just stipple just a little bit of paint in there, and then I'm just going to kind of place kind of heavy chunks of paint and move them around just a little bit, and that's going to help to kind of soften that up. Now I'm going to let this dry now. I don't want to go back there and touch it now that I did that stippling, but you can see I lost that really hard line. You saw that hard line in the shadow. I've lost that hard line now. So I'll let that dry. I won't really touch that until it's dry, and then I can come back in and do more. I'm going to kind of reestablish a shadow right in here. I lost this just a little bit, so I'm going to glaze some more back in. Now at this point I'm being a lot more gentle with my brush and where my colors are going. And I'm pushing the brush. Now here, I want to kind of use the flat blade, but I have that little pocket right there. So what I did is I laid the paint down, and then I used the tip of the brush to kind of push it in to that pocket, and it'll deposit that, but it'll kind of peel just a little bit of the excess paint off as it's going in. So it's still kind of blending, but you know, it's a little tight area, so some techniques won't work if the area is too small. We'll use little things like the stippling or that little kind of push technique and stuff like that. I'm going to reestablish some shadow right in here. Now I'm being real soft, especially with the shadow. I don't want to be real heavy-handed with the shadow. If you're real heavy-handed with your shadow, you'll start to get almost like a muddy feel. The shadows will get muddy. You're going to notice that. And what's happening is you're going too fast with your transitions and you're being too heavy with it. So if we make sure that we're just as gentle with our shadows as we are with our highlights, it'll smooth out your model. So I'm really liking the shape that this is taking at this point. I'm going to establish a little shadow here. I like this definition around the eye. So I'm going to kind of define that a little more. I think that creates a lot more character right there. So I'm going to define that. Now here, I'm doing that. Remember what we talked about with the wet on wet? And what I did is I wet the surface down, and then I applied the paint. And as I rolled the paint came off the tip of the brush as my brush is sweeping sideways. So like 1/3 of my brush, maybe even half of my brush was touching the surface. And where the tip of the brush landed, it peeled a little extra paint off, and it created that hard line. So you see that nice hard line that I created right there? Just by laying a little paint on and rolling it, I can do it on the same thing on this side. You'll notice right here I can take that color, and all I got to do is just kind of paint it in like this, and then I can come back with it and work back and forth. It'll start to create that harder line. I kind of forgot to wet the surface down, which was awesome, but See how it's starting to create that nice hard line as I work this back and forth? So now I have that line. That'd be really hard to paint if I were to go in and try to just freehand a little black line and then gauge it. But now if you look at the model straight on, that nice black line really created a lot of definition to the model. I don't like it over the eyelid right there, so I'm going to come back in and just brighten that up a little bit because that transition was too hard. So now, yeah, that eye looks a lot better. A lot better. I'm liking that quite a bit. Maybe a little bit more right in here. And now I'll come back in with my shadow, and I'm going to reestablish the darkest recesses of this eye. So here I'm just kind of doing another spit blend. So you see, I'm using a lot of different blending techniques as I move the paint around. It just depends on the surface and what the result I'm looking for is. Another good spot to put a shadow is right here at the bridge of the nose. You always have a shadow right there at that crease. So I'm going to reestablish that shadow. Kind of start to recreate some highlights. Now here I'm doing like almost a full glaze. That paint is really wet. It just wants to kind of move around. Can establish the brow. This is more of a spit blend here. I'm trying to create more opacity. So I don't want it quite a glaze. But I also want to be able to move the paint around. So if it's too thick, it'll start to bunch up. But I could kind of do like a little spit blend here. Now at this point, I've gotten a lot of my glazing done. I want to re-establish my dominant, I guess you'd call it, my dominant highlights. I really want to make sure that we have those in place because as soon as we start to glaze, we're going to lose a lot of those highlights again. So I'm going to spend some time now to just re-establish those highlights. I'm painting with almost pure white right now.
You're off. Can you bring it up?
Huh?
Bring it up.
Ooh, there we go. Sorry. Now you'll notice one thing when I am placing this paint, you're seeing I'm doing a lot more dotting. If my highlights are totally smooth and straight lines, it doesn't give any texture to it. You know, you always see that hard edge like on a Space Marine or something where somebody came in and they painted these line edges and they're all the same value, they're all the same tone, and they're just straight lines. It makes the model look very plasticky. In reality, most surfaces aren't totally smooth. They're going to have some type of, if they don't have pitting and imperfections just in the surface themselves, they're going to reflect light a little bit. And if there's clouds in the sky or a person standing by them or a tree or whatever, I mean, you know, there's so many different aspects that affect how light hits on your day-to-day, you know, whatever object you're looking at. If those lines are perfectly straight, it's almost like it's in a controlled light environment. But if we create variations, it gives the idea of depth and movement without having to paint it. You know what I mean? So it's really important that we, especially with these final highlights like this that I'm placing, that I'm not like totally straight and square with them. I want to make sure there's a lot of variation to them. It creates a lot more interest. The highlights are very, very strong. You're probably noticing that as you're watching right now. They're super strong, and they're going to kind of stay that way because when I glaze, it's going to take a bit to come back from that. I always want to highlight the top of the lens, the eyelids, but I'm not going all the way into the depth of the eyelid down in here. I'm just kind of catching the very top of it because, again, we want to create shape and movement of the piece. We don't want to. If I highlight the entire eye, you're going to lose that effect. So it's looking pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that. I think my highlights are maybe a little bit more right here on the chin. I can see the light reflecting off of that just a little bit more. Maybe a touch right here. We got these little. It's got a pretty good little smile going on. So I want to kind of exaggerate that just a little bit. By playing with our highlights, you'll notice that the tone of the character will change too. Just by putting those two little dots on each side of the mouth, you notice the mouth opened up more. Before he looked slightly grimacing, he looks a lot happier now. He's smiling a little more. Whereas if I come in and do the opposite, and instead of that highlight, I create some shadow in here. A little too far. Just by creating a little bit of that shadow, you notice his smile kind of went away a little bit. He's not quite as happy as he was before. And we can do that a lot with the models too. Of course, if we create darker, we go a lot darker and create more contrast around the eyes, he'll become more menacing, more grimacing. He'll give that sinister look. So if I come in and really put some black, some depth in here, maybe right across that brow, right in here. Now you notice he became a lot more sinister, more kind of So kind of play with your shadows and stuff. Play with your highlights. It'll help to create the mood and tone for the model. I'm going to soften that just a little bit. It looks a little raccoony to me. So we'll soften that up a little bit. Maybe just a touch more light to the side of the eyes here. A little more light right in here. Now, a lot of people, when they're painting faces and heads, they tend to put the light right here, and then they have this dark line that goes along the hair edge. And I was a culprit of it. That was how I was kind of taught too, was to put that dark line to separate the hair from the forehead. But if you look at people, your brightest spot is always going to be the top of the head because that's where the sun's hitting at, right? You got the sun coming directly down onto the model. That's going to be the brightest spot, but a lot of time hair is blocking it. They put that dark edge, but the light will actually filter through the hair a little bit at the very edges of the hair. So we want to make sure that we create that brightness at the top of the head. It'll sell the idea of the face more realistically. We just want to make sure that we don't make it brighter than this point here. We still want that bright spot there, but it can't be brighter than here because the eyes are what sell a model. That's the focus point of the model. So we want to make sure that area around the eye stays the brightest. So I'll kind of reestablish those highlights again. Maybe a little bit right next to that dark line. We have just a little spot that's going to catch some light right here. And a little spot that's going to catch the light right here. And again, this is almost that spit blending. It's almost a mix between like a glaze and a spit blend there. So I'll soften that transition up just a bit right in here. This is a full glaze right here. I'm just softening that up. I'm going to come back in and reestablish those frown lines. I'm going to take my midtone. We'll never put our shadow tone in the forehead. You'll never use shadow tone in the forehead, even for creases, because that's where the brightest section of light is going to be. And if you go in and put those shadow tones in, it's not going to sell properly. But I can just by putting just the midtone in, you'll notice that it reestablishes everything, and that midtone that we originally used is going to create a lot of character and movement and show that frowniness without losing the values. A good cheat for that to make sure that you have it right is now at this point I would probably take and do a black and white photo of the model. What happens is that gets rid of all the colors. You're not reading colors, you're reading tones, and that'll help tell you, am I bright enough in one spot, or am I too dark in one spot, stuff like that. So it's a really good tool to use. But I'm pretty happy with that. So now we're going to start with our colors. I'll have Kat link up a picture. But what we pretty much have when we're doing a model is we're going to break the face down into 3 zones. One's going to be a yellow zone, one's going to be a red zone, and one's going to be a blue zone. And we break the face down into that, but I'll tell you the reasoning for that. So the face would break down where yellow zone would be from here to here. This is going to be your yellow zone. And then from the eyes out to the nose is going to be your red zone. Your face is going to be red from there. And then from about your jawline up, to about here is going to be a blue zone. So it's real easy to break down the face into that. And if you look at most models, you're going to see those zones of color. You're going to see the yellow, you're going to see the red, you're going to see the blue, especially on regular skin tones. Now, we'll cheat those colors like with green. Can I see one of those orcs? So on the orc here, wow, you can't even see the colors. The camera's really saturated here. But our red zone is not quite so red because of the yellows. It's a green skin, so we were able to use yellows to contrast the greens, but still add some reds into them. Whereas up here, the yellows became more of a ochre color to offset. So we needed some browns in the yellows to counteract the greens. So that rule will still apply. There'll still be a yellow, a red, and a blue zone. But when you do other skin tones, you're going to start to adjust. I'll see if Kat can post a little bit better camera pictures, and it'll kind of show the colors that we used in those busts. So back here again. Now the reason that this is yellow is because there's a lot of bone here without a lot of flesh. There's not a lot of muscle and meat here. So there's not going to be a lot of blood that associates with that area. Your skin's going to be, not thin, but there's not a lot of bulk padding underneath it. So this is going to take on more of a yellow tone, whereas around the eyes and the nose, this is where your sinus cavities are. This is where all the muscles are in your face. A lot of your muscle structure is right in here. So this is going to take on a very red tone. Of course, the nose is going to be red. It's all cartilage. We have a lot of blood flow in the nose, along the mouth and stuff. The upper mouth, a lot of muscles in here. So this area is going to really take on that red tone. Whereas down here, yes, it has muscle, and but the tendency, especially with males, there's a lot of skin here, and it's also the falling point of the shadow. When we add blues here, it's going to create the bottom of the face to fall away. You'll notice you'll get a lot more interest into the eye structure of the model when we add some blues. So we'll go ahead and start with that. So I'll show you on my palette. I'm going to come back in. Here's my red. It's just a nice, it's definitely not a soft red. No, I don't want to use that red. Yeah, I'll use that red. That's fine. Did I grab a blue? No, I didn't. So here's my blue. You can use any variation of these colors you want. You can use, I tend to use like sanguine base or burgundy wine. I like those colors. So I have my blue, I have my yellow, right there. I have my yellow. It's just a nice, vibrant yellow. So I'm going to go ahead and start prepping these now. So these are going to be glazes. These are going to be like legitimate glazes. We're going to take this paint way down. I mean, you can see how thin that paint is on my palette. I really want that paint thinned out. I'm going to clear my brush, grab a little bit of that color, and I'm just going to start to glaze in. This is also going to help unify everything too. You'll notice this is getting unified. I'm going to come in and glaze this red into these areas. Now, I'm going to avoid this point at the eye where I have these bright spots. I'm not going to put any red in there because even though that is in the red zone, there's a lot of bone right there. That's where our cheekbones hit. So that's actually going to take on a little bit of yellow. If we put too much red in there, it almost looks like he's crying. So you just want to really softly glaze in these reds. You can see I'm not being real heavy with them. I'm just softly glazing them in. Now, one thing I will do is I'm going to come in with a little bit heavy glit red right in here. I'm going to place it just like that, and then I'm going to feather it out. But I want that to be really dominant red. I can do that with a whole bunch of glazes and just keep adding glaze and adding glaze and adding glaze, or I can come in and just do a real quick thick one. It's almost like that spit blend, but the paint is thinned down quite a bit. Or we can do the wet on wet, where we're going to wet the surface down first, place that paint in there, and then pull it around. We just don't want it to pool, and we don't want tidal marks. I need to be real gentle with that. We don't want to go too far with the red, especially on a male. It'll start to look like he's got rouge on. So we have to kind of be gentle with that as we're doing it. Now, in this nose, I'm going to take my shadow color, and I'm going to add some red to my shadow color. A little darker. So you can see on my palette, right there. I took that red. I took my shadow color, some black. Maybe a little more skin tone to it. I'm going to create a nice dark, very red dominant color, and I'm going to paint that along the bottom of the nose. This is kind of one of the tricks that Ben taught me, and it totally makes sense. There's just a little more red in it. This is where a lot of the blood collects in the face. The nasal passages are always going to be very dominant red. So if you look at it from underneath, it's really like bleh, like really loaded in there. But then as the model rolls, you won't notice it as much, but it will reflect into the colors around it. So make sure that you do that when you do those models, that you create that in there. And then I'm going to push the red into the nose, a little more across the cheek, create a little more depth. Now with this, I'll just play quite a bit. I'll come back and forth quite a few times. This might take me an hour, maybe 2 hours, to really define exactly where I want that red and the blue and the yellows, because it'll be a balance point, and each model is going to be different, and each distinction of the model is going to be different. So just kind of play with it. Your eye will notice if something's too far or if it's not far enough. I'm going to really push this blue underneath the lip, along the jawline, underneath the chin. I'm going to go pure blue. I mean, you can see how blue that is. I'm going to really, really swat the blue in there.
Your own soft screen?
Huh?
Your own soft screen?
Mm-hmm. So I'm kind of softening the edges of that blue. Up into the ear. Again on that side, up into the ear. Now I'll take my shadow color and again come in, and now this is that wet on wet. You know, the paint's already really wet, and I threw a whole bunch of water on it. You can see how wet that paint is. See how it's glistening. I'm going to come back in with that shadow and just kind of soften that transition point right along the bottom of the jawline. But I'm being careful to stay away from the heavy shadow in there. I'm just kind of hitting that jawline. So this is getting pretty close with the blues, maybe a little more in here. Yeah, definitely some more in here. I'm going to let that blue kind of go in and intermix just a little bit with those reds at the bottom of this cheek. It'll create nice color variation right there and kind of transition that just a little bit more. Once I'm done with that, now I'm going to come back in with my yellows. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to start to kind of feather these yellows in. Whoop, a little too much. And here, right above the eye, add just a little bit more the yellow in there. So these are really thin glazes. You can really see it on the white. The yellow's very, very thin. So I'm gonna have to figure out the white balance on this camera. See if we can adjust that a little bit, because it's definitely picking up a lot of the whites in the model.
Mm-hmm.
So like I said, you'll kind of play with it a little more. Now that I've put the blues in, I can see that my reds didn't go far enough. So I'll come in and add just a little more red in here. All right. So now we've established that color. We're going to come back in now again. Remember we talked about how we really made those highlights dominant because they're going to kind of take over things. Now we're going to take some more of those skin tones, mainly the mid-tone, and we're just going to kind of start to soften those transitions again. We have that color, and if we stay really, really glazy with our color, here's our mid-tone right here. I'm very, very wet. It's a glaze. It's very light. I'm just going to kind of start to put a couple skin tone glazes over. The reason I'm doing this now is I want to have that idea of transparency. Your skin is transparent. And as I kind of glaze these skin coats, these skin tones over the top of the colors, it has the colors, but it has the skin tone underneath the color. The skin tone over the top of the color. So it really creates more depth in creation. So, you're really seeing the different blending techniques put to use. So I'm going to go ahead and let this dry. I'm going to cheat it real quick. Okay, so it's dry now, and I got those skin tones in there. I'm going to come back in now, again, and I'm going to start to create those highlights again. Now I'm going to be real soft with them this time because we're not really going to spend too much more time going over the skin tones, but I do want those highlights to be the most dominant piece of the model. So we'll reestablish highlights. Kind of highlight this forehead. I love this sculpt for this. Every section of this model has so much interest to it. The forehead is just so cool looking. I'd almost like to maybe go in and freehand in just a little bit of vein structure. Maybe show, I think that'd be pretty cool. I might try it on one of the models when I have some time. But anyways, I won't yammer about that, but I'm gonna reestablish these highlights. Now here at the top of the nose, I'm gonna give two little dots. I'm gonna dot and dot, and that's gonna create that texture movement of the face. Again, at the tip of the nose, along each nostril, and then at the edge of the eye right here. This always gets, couple little dots, and a couple little dots right here. Crow's feet are going to catch light, and the edge of those eyes are going to catch light. If we put those brights in here, it ends up making the face look a little funny. So we want to make sure that we roll those to the outside. Obviously, the top of the lip right here is just going to get a little more highlight. This is going to catch a little light. The chin right here will catch just a little light. Now, when I'm doing my lips, I'm just going to take that shadow skin tone color, maybe just lighten it up just a touch, and I'm going to add some red to it. I don't want to go pure red. It's going to look like he's got like lipstick on or something, but I'll come in and I'll paint the lips with this slightly reddish skin tone. That creates nice interest for the model, for the colors. Come in and shadow into the teeth just a little bit. I'm going to take that red and just add it to black. So it's almost a black, but it's got just a little bit of red in it. That's going to give the idea of the inside of the mouth. Got to be careful with the red though. If you go too much, you don't end up making it look like he's got a bloody mouth, or his gums are bleeding or something like that. So we'll just kind of come in, and I want to get rid of any bright lines inside the mouth, as long as they're not the teeth. The teeth are fine to be bright, but you don't want bright lines inside the gum line. That will really be distracting for the model. The lips need just a little more detail. And then I can highlight the lips the same way. I'm going to take that same color that I used to paint the lips. I'm going to add just a little white to it until it becomes pretty dominant white. So you can see right here it's pretty dominant white, but it's not pure white. And I create some highlights on the lips now, and I'm just gonna create little lines. Oops, that's too thick. But if you just kind of do some little dots and lines, that's gonna kind of create the shape of the lip. We do want the brighter highlights to be here, whereas the darker highlights are along the edges, because we're gonna catch light more right along the front of the lip. And then just a touch right in here, there's that little piece on the upper part of your lip that hangs down. I don't know exactly what it's called, but we'll highlight that. Even though it's in a shadow part of the face, we will give it just a little bit of light. It creates a little ambient light from the teeth, maybe brighten the teeth. I don't want to go pure white with my teeth. I'm going to add some skin tone to that also. If the teeth go pure white, it's going to look like he's one of those weird dentists that, they brighten their teeth constantly and they got that super shiny smile. He'll look weird like that. It always kind of is creepy. So if I give it a little skin tone to it, that'll be nice for it. So now we're starting to see the model's really starting to take shape now. We're starting to get a lot of color movement to it. You can see the shape of the model. So at this point, I'd probably just kind of go in and do just a little bit of refinements. Maybe create a little more shadow, a little more transition, but it's going to be mainly glazes. We'll just do some glazes around it. But in essence, this is pretty close. So I'll have Kat take a couple pictures, and we'll post up. You guys will be able to see the color nuances with the camera a little better, and we'll make sure that we get those up on the group. So at this point, I'll go ahead and open it up for questions. Does anybody have any questions?
I may have jumped in late, but when you're doing your shadows, I guess depending on the look you're going for, whether you use a warmer tone or a colder tone?
On my face structure, all of my shadows are based off of this skin tone. So let me come back up. All of my colors are based off of the skin tone with either white or black. And I come in and I sketch in everything. I create all the shape with just these because this is a very neutral color.
Okay.
That's why I like Talon on Flesh. It's a very neutral skin tone. It's not super rosy. It's not super yellowy. It's not olive. It's a very neutral skin tone. Once I've created the shape of the face, I'll actually go with glazes and start to create the colors. So you'll notice on this model, especially when you get the pictures, I have yellow glazes up here, the red glazes here, and the blue glazes here. Those are over almost a basic sketch color, which was those very neutral skin tones. It allows, if I were to use a blue skin tone and create a blue shadow in my skin tone and actually apply my skin tone with a blue shadow, as soon as I add red to that, it's going to be purple. It won't become red, and so I'll end up fighting that. So that's the reason that I use. That's the reason I use such a neutral skin tone. Is it allows me more variation with my colors when I go in to start to create the colors with glazes.
And it might be adding to it, but tattoos in the skin.
Tattoos in skin are actually pretty easy. The whole trick to them is the transparency of the skin. Tattoos are in the skin; they're not on top of the skin. So what we'll do is we'll figure out the color that we're going to use for our tattoo, whether it's the standard green tattoo or a colored tattoo or whatever. And once we're done, that same skin glaze, that mid-tone skin that I glaze the entire model with, after I'd set down all of my colors, I do the same thing. I would just glaze maybe 1 or 2 coats of skin tone over the top of that tattoo. It's going to give it the idea that it's under the skin instead of painted on top of the skin.
Cool. Thank you.
All right. Anybody else? So I guess I talked a lot about the colors and stuff like that, but the big thing I want to show was the different techniques of blending that I was using on the model. I definitely didn't stick to just one style of blending. I was all over the place. I was using spit blending. I was using wet blending. I was using wet on wet blending. I was using glazing. So really the biggest thing to take from this is to make sure that you're learning how to use your brush and how to capture all the techniques that you need to do. So sit down and take the time and really define your brush movement. Don't be so worried about learning all of the blending techniques. Maybe just take 1 or 2 blending techniques and kind of refine those, and those habits will carry over to the other techniques. With Kat this weekend, teaching her, she's a watercolorist, and so she uses a lot of glazes, and she kept falling back into that habit of glazing, which wasn't bad, but she was able to take all of that technique, and it was just now a matter of how she prepped her paint. She was able to start using things like loaded brush and start using the spit blending technique, stuff like that. She just had to change. She didn't change how she used the brush. She didn't change how she approached a model with the brush. The only thing she changed was the opacity of the paint and how she maneuvered the paint on the model. So I hope this helped for everybody. I hope that you guys, between all of these, I guess we only recorded 2, huh? We didn't record the first one.
No.
Do we have 3? Well, anyway, hopefully by watching the series of videos, I can't remember how many are in it, but just by watching this series of videos, you'll kind of get a better understanding for how blending works and kind of what you guys need to do. So I'm going to go ahead and call it. Anything you want to add, Kat, or no? Okay. Well, thank you guys for tuning in, and I was thinking maybe next week we'll detail the eyes on this guy or something. I can kind of go over a quick technique on how to do eyes. So until next week. Good night.